It's a great honor to speak at this conference. I'm very sorry I cannot be present to see all my friends from the vanadium industry in China and around the world. I think in 5 or 10 years, we will look back at this event and recognize that this is really a beginning point for a new opportunity in vanadium. So I want to talk a little bit about the vanadium market, where we're at right now, and have a look at what we expect to see in the future as the development of the vanadium battery continues. This chart is depicting production, consumption, and the price of vanadium. In this case, we're talking about units of pure vanadium, metric tons of pure vanadium per year. And we see production as the orange line, consumption as the blue line, and the price in the West, in warehouse Rotterdam basis, is shown by the green line. And a couple of things to note. That we can see that over the period of these 20-some years, the vanadium market has grown about 200%. So we have a compound annual growth rate of about 5.3% per year. And that's important to recognize as we think about what's coming in the future. If we take this data and we break it down and look at it on an annual basis, we see some years where production exceeds consumption, and other years where consumption exceeds production. And I think this chart helps to show the correlation between the balance between production and consumption and the vanadium price. We see in 2005 a price spike following 2004, a year in which we consume more vanadium than we produced. We follow that with 6 years of continued surplus production, pushing the price down. And then we went into a deficit in 2011 and 12, but a lot of inventory had built up. And finally, by 2017, 18, excess inventory was gone. And again, the market price reacted to the balance. I want to take a attempt at looking forward in the vanadium market. And the first thing we'll do is look at the consumption of vanadium, not including energy storage. So this is the historical markets for vanadium. And what we're showing here is the change in vanadium consumption from 2002 forward. And there's two sources in this chart of change in consumption. One is growing steel production, the number of tons of steel produced globally every year. And the second important factor is the specific consumption rate of vanadium. That is, how many kilos of V are consumed for every ton of steel produced. And this chart shows us very clearly that looking back, the majority of the growth in vanadium consumption has come from growing global steel production. It has been very dramatic over the last 20 years or so. Looking forward, we don't expect to see steel production grow at such a high rate. We expect to see between 1% and 2% growth in annual steel production. And so the amount of growth in vanadium consumption from growing steel production will be smaller than what we've seen in the past. But at the same time, we see the ongoing increase in specific vanadium consumption continuing to grow and become more and more important in terms of new consumption of vanadium. And there's a very good reason for this. Basically, the use of vanadium in high-strength, low-alloy steels, which are very efficient in terms of their ability to be used in infrastructure in load-bearing applications. The economics of replacing carbon manganese steels that are typically used in these spaces is very strong. If we add a small amount of vanadium, we can increase the cost of the steel a very small amount, but we can dramatically increase the yield strength of the steel. And that means we need less steel to build the projects that need to be built to develop the economy and create opportunity for the people. So what's happening is the carbon manganese steels that we've produced for 120 years are being replaced by higher strength steels, including vanadium bearing high strength low alloy steels. And as a result, we can achieve the goal of building infrastructure for economic opportunity with a minimal consumption of energy, a minimal consumption of raw materials, a minimal generation of pollution, and a minimum amount of capital employed in steelmaking capacity for a given amount of output. So in balance, we foresee a situation where the steel industry will continue to see growing vanadium consumption, but it's going to be driven more by the substitution of HSLA vanadium-bearing steels for carbon manganese steels than it will be a result of growing steel production. Now let's turn to the battery and have a look at some data here. Vanadium flow batteries have been around for 30 plus years. Really today, what we're seeing is the confluence of the development of a long duration grid level storage market together with the maturation of the vanadium flow battery technology and manufacturing systems. And as a result of this confluence, we're seeing a tremendous opportunity for vanadium flow batteries on the grid in the future. This chart is data from a project that was taken on by Guidehouse Insights to try and assess how much vanadium flow redox battery capacity we'll see in the coming years. And in their chart, they suggest here that we're going to see roughly 27 gigawatt hours of vanadium flow battery capacity by 2030 on a global basis. I will suggest that this is a difficult task to forecast market share for a new technology in a new market. And we see a lot of different forecasts out there for how quickly vanadium batteries will take off. And I'm going to use this forecast as the basis for our discussion, but do be aware there are other forecasts that will vary significantly from this forecast. If we take this forecast for capacity of energy storage in flow batteries, we can convert it to vanadium consumption. We need about 5.5 metric tons of pure vanadium for every megawatt hour of storage capacity. So if we translate the Guidehouse Insights data into vanadium consumption, this is the sort of picture that we see. And you can see we're projecting here with this forecast that vanadium consumption in batteries by 2029 will basically be equal to vanadium consumption in all applications in 2022. So it's a massive amount of growth. And we can lay this potential growth in vanadium in batteries on top of what we see as the ongoing growth of vanadium in traditional markets and traditional geographies. This chart is interesting because what this is showing us is that the green line represents production of vanadium from current sources. So this is all of the producers that are operating today, how much vanadium they can produce going forward, assuming that they all follow through on announced capacity expansion plans. And we see with the bars, the consumption of vanadium with the energy storage laid on top. And I think the interesting fact here is that this chart shows that if there is no demand for vanadium in flow batteries, with the expansions that existing producers have planned, there can be adequate capacity to meet the demand. However, once we consider the flow battery demand, we can see that even with modest demand in batteries, the existing capacity will be challenged to produce enough vanadium to meet the demands. So we're clearly heading into an environment where demand is going to push the supply side, and we'll have to see how quickly the supply side can respond. I'll note that if we go back to the price charts and look at the price spikes, typically when we have an upset in the market and suddenly demand moves up, it takes the supply side 12 to 14 months to catch up. And that's what we see if we look at the price spikes, typically about 12 months shoulder to shoulder. So as we see this market tighten up, we can expect some pressure on the vanadium market, and then we'll see how the supply base reacts in terms of expansions from existing capacity and potential new projects. And clearly, there's a number of potential new projects out there. I don't attempt to try and prescribe which projects may or may not come to market, but it's clear that if the vanadium battery demand develops even close to these numbers, we're going to need significant new capacity. This is an attempt to look at the cash cost curve for vanadium production today. And the important takeaway in this chart is the fact that those last incremental units of vanadium required to meet demand today have a cash cost of somewhere around $13 per pound of V2O5. So that's an important number to remember. Now let's look back at the price of vanadium, the nominal price. So this data has not been adjusted for inflation. This is actual published prices in warehouse Rotterdam basis. And again, we see the three price spikes here. In 2005, we saw a major price spike after China introduced the first standard for high-strength rebar, and suddenly demand basically doubled overnight. And we can see it took about 12 or 14 months for the supply base to catch up and fill the void. In 2008, we had very heavy rains in South Africa affecting electricity production. And at this point in time, South Africa was a very large producer of vanadium. And again, we see a period of about 14 months, in this case, shoulder to shoulder, before the price spike was alleviated by the situation improving in South Africa. And then we see the very large price spike in 2018. Again, we saw China revise the standards for high-strength rebar to close some loopholes that were being used to allow people putting quench and tempered steel into this application illegally. And with the closing of those loopholes, the demand for vanadium leapt up. And again, we saw the price move up. And once again, 12 to 14 months later, the price spike was over and prices were returning to historical levels. The other important thing to look at here is the mean and median price. Over the last 18 to 20 years, the average price for V2O5 in warehouse Rotterdam has been $8.42. We can look at the same data on a different basis, looking at the frequency chart. And what this chart is showing us is the frequency of prices, how many months over these past 20 years the price has been at various levels. And we can see the peak here is $6 to $7. So between $6 and $7 is the most common vanadium price looking back. I'll also note that there is a minor peak at the $16 to $17 level. And I do believe this demonstrates a point of stability in terms of vanadium consumption at those prices. And when we go above those prices, we do see substitutional loss of demand in the steel industry. In some cases, it becomes an emotional issue. But when we see V2O5 prices above this level, we do see loss of market due to substitution. Below this price level, we typically don't see that substitution. So that's an important number to think about as well. Now I want to take a look at this same data on an inflated basis. And we're going to see a very different picture as a result of the massive amount of inflation that we've seen in the past recent years. So this is the same data inflated. And here we see the mean is not $8.45 anymore, it's $12.45. So if we look at this data on an inflated basis, the average V2O5 price over these 18 years has been $12.45. Again, we look at the same data on the distribution chart, and we can see between $7 and $8 is the most popular price on an inflated basis, but we do see a large number of occurrences up to $12 to $13. And again, we see this average of $12.45. So if we want to talk about future vanadium prices, one important factor is that we have to have a view towards inflation. Will we continue to see inflationary factors driving up the cost of production and therefore the price of vanadium as well as everything else? Or will we see a different scenario in the future? And I think we can probably come up with a lot of different views there. Again, we see the secondary peak in this chart now at $21 to $22. And so this data would suggest to me that as the supply and demand picture changes, we see pressure on the market due to growing demand. I think when we get prices up above $21 to $22, the price will not stay in that regime for very long. I think we'll see substitutional loss of demand above those levels. So really, this data would suggest the sweet spot for vanadium prices going forward is between $7 and $22 with an average of $12.45. In this data, again, we're looking at Western vanadium prices, in this case on an annual basis, on an inflated basis. And here we see, looking at annual data rather than monthly data, the average price of $11.62 per pound of V2O5. So in summary, we really expect to see vanadium consumption grow in the future as a result of just organic growth from the traditional markets, but potentially explosive growth from energy storage applications, including vanadium redox flow batteries. I should note that there's a number of other energy storage technologies looking at the use of vanadium that could become important in the next 10 years as well. We, again, will continue to see vanadium consumption grow in the steel industry, but it's going to be associated with growing specific consumption rates more than it will be with growing steel production. As the charts show, if we have even modest demand from energy storage applications, the market will be challenged to meet that demand. The data tells us that the long-term inflated V2O5 price is $9 to $12 per pound of V2O5. And today, that last point on the cash cost curve is $12 per pound of V2O5. So I think you can take all of this data and come up with a forecast for what you think the price will be going forward. But it does seem to me we're in a regime where double-digit prices are probably going to dominate for some period of time. And I think we're going to be fluctuating between that $9 and $10 price up to somewhere around $20. I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about one of our companies, US Vanadium in the USA. US Vanadium is a producer of very high purity vanadium oxides, both V2O3 and V2O5. The plant is a processor of secondary materials. So we take vanadium-bearing ashes and slags and wastes from other industries and recover the vanadium. The vanadium is recovered, and the remaining solid material is passed over a belt filter. Now that material is being repurposed in concrete and asphalt production. So we're taking industrial waste, we're extracting the vanadium, and we're repurposing the rest of the solid material. This is a file that gives you some idea of the variety of raw materials the plant can process. As I said, the vanadium oxides produced at the Hot Springs plant are, we feel, among the purest in the world. And this becomes very important when we start talking about flow batteries. The electrolyte in our process is produced using a combination of V2O3 and V2O5. And it's important to have very high purity oxides in order to make electrolyte. This is an interesting chart looking at 17 different specifications for electrolyte from flow battery companies around the world. And we see the list of elements that people are interested in, and we can see the range of limits for those elements amongst these specifications. And I think if you look at this, you come away with the conclusion that impurities in electrolyte are critical. In some cases, they're important from a safety standpoint if they're going to potentially catalyze hydrogen production. Elements that will precipitate will block the cell and cause a loss of capacity and other operating problems. So everyone has a different view on these elements, but if you take this chart and just look at the average for all these specifications, the total amount of allowable impurities is something less than 0.03%. And again, when we talk about vanadium oxides, we produce electrolyte from the oxides. The impurities that are in the electrolyte or in the oxides will report to the electrolyte. In some cases, we can use an electrolysis process to remove some of these impurities and lower them to a certain level. But by and large, the impurities that are present in the vanadium oxides are going to report to the electrolyte, and that becomes an important factor. So that's the end of my talk. I thank you for your attention, and I'll be very happy to try and address any questions.
Thanks, Terry, for your good presentation. 看看我们现场有
Now we have a few minutes for Q&A.
I didn't understand. Sorry.
What's production in U.S. vanadium in last 3 years?
So U.S. vanadium plant has a nameplate capacity of 5,500 metric tons of V2O5 per year. The facility was taken over by U.S. Vanadium at the end of 2019, and we've been working to expand production, making some significant investments in the plant. I can tell you that last year we produced only about 2,500 metric tons of V2O5 equivalent. And in this year, our plan is to produce about 4,000 metric tons of V2O5. And as we go forward into next year, we should approach the 5,000 to 5,500 metric tons of V2O5 per year.
Thank you.
别人有问题吗？还有谁？
Any more questions from the floor?
And I want to ask, how does the impurity of the electrolyte will impact the battery capacity, and how will it function in the impurity of the electrolyte?
Yeah, so as the last slide showed, there are some elements where we will see the impurities precipitate. Just let me pull up the chart here. Yeah, so in some cases, elements, copper, molybdenum, palladium, will cause the production of hydrogen gas and the formation of H2S, which is a serious safety issue. Some of the other elements are going to precipitate either in the analyte or catholyte. And again, these precipitates will block the pores of the ion exchange membrane, and this will have a negative impact on the capacity of the battery. Elements that will stay fully soluble, both in the catholyte and analyte, have a very minor impact on the performance of the battery, but their presence does have a minor impact on capacity for the battery. So the impact of the impurities, as this chart shows us, will depend on which elements we're talking about.
Dr. Harry, give a good talk. Yeah, and your prediction, the price of the vanadium will because the appear of the larger massive and storage demand. How to keep the price? How to make, and which kind of resource can be found to balance the price in the future? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So there are, I'm going to say, at least 100 potential new vanadium projects being promoted around the world. Of course, in China, we have vast resources for stone coal, and we have the opportunity to increase production of vanadium in China from stone coal. If we look at Australia, we have a number of vanadium titanium magnetite deposits, some shale oil deposits, and some vanadium and uranium deposits. We have projects in South Africa looking to mine the same ore bodies that today Rovan and Vametco Bushveld are mining. So there's plenty of opportunities for new vanadium come to the market. The concern is that it takes time. And if we look historically, from the time of construction financing until the time of first production has typically been 5 years. And so the question is, how can we bring on new capacity in a shorter period of time? I think we can look to some new secondary projects as opportunities. Last year, the International Maritime Organization lowered the sulfur specification in bunker fuel from 3.5% to 0.5%. And what this means is that in the past, bunker fuel for ocean-going vessels was basically the heavy bottoms from the oil refineries blended together. But now, to meet the new sulfur limitations, all of that heavy bottoms needs to be processed in desulfurization catalytic applications. And that means there's going to be a tremendous surge in spent catalysts containing vanadium coming to the market in the next few years. And we already see people investing in these opportunities. You'll note that AMG Vanadium has announced a MOU in Saudi Arabia to recover vanadium from some ash generated in a gasification unit in stage 1 and then spent catalyst in stage 2. I think AMG has also announced an MOU with a Chinese company near Shanghai to develop a new facility to process spent catalyst. So, as I said, I won't try and decide who's going to win and who's going to lose. I think in the near term, some of the secondary projects can come to market sooner. They don't have to develop a mine. They have a smaller footprint in terms of capital investment, and the facilities can be built quicker. So I would guess that we're going to see some new secondary production coming to the market first, and eventually some new primary production will be required as well.
我们看看，我们还有很多。
Do we have any questions from the online audience?
Hi, on the question and answer window, there is a question. Can you answer?
Okay.
Can you see the question answer online?
Yeah, so we have one online question. What is the price for vanadium electrolyte? And this is a new market, and today prices are being negotiated between producers and consumers. So it's proprietary information, but if you think about the commodity vanadium price today, plus some premium for the quality of the oxide, plus some conversion costs, you can back into what the cost of electrolyte production will be, and then make a guess at the electrolyte price. So the price is a function of a lot of different things. We also have some people using 1.6 molar electrolyte, some people 1.7, 1.8, and obviously the higher molarity means a higher price per liter. But I would also point out that, as we all know, this electrolyte is not consumed. The life of the electrolyte is basically infinity. We've done a lot of work at US Vanadium to take electrolyte from old batteries and microfilter it and make small adjustments to the valence state and test its performance. And it performs very well, no different than new electrolyte. We've also been able to demonstrate that we can hydrolyze the electrolyte and recover the vanadium very efficiently if in fact we have to. But if we think about a vanadium flow battery running for 20 or 25 years and 1 or 2 times a day cycling, and we think about the fact that this battery can last for 10 or 20,000 cycles, at the end of that time, the vanadium can be delivered to the next battery and then to the next battery. So over time, we can store, we approach an infinite number of kilowatt hours that can be stored for every liter of electrolyte. And in that environment, I would argue that the cost of the electrolyte really becomes a small issue if we look at the long run. The electrolyte price has been a subject that has been debated for many years in this space. And I think that if we look at the situation now and understanding the infinite life of the electrolyte, we have to recognize that it brings tremendous value to this technology.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for your professional presentation on global vanadium market. Okay, good night for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry I cannot be there, and please have one drink for me this evening.